Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. My name is Maurizio Benazzo.
My name is Zaya Benazzo.
We are speaking to you from the unceded territory of the coastal Milwaukee and South Pomo indigenous populations, also known as Sebastopol, California. So here we are.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for being here today for this conversation. We're really, really honored to have with us Pir Zia Inayat Khan, and
we're going to read a brief
introduction
before
our conversation.
Yeah. So, Pir Zia Inayat Khan, PhD, is a scholar of religion and teacher of Sufism in the internationalist Sufi lineage of his grandfather, Hazrat Inayat Khan. Pirziya is the president of the Inayatiya organization and founder of Suluk Academy, a school of Sufi contemplative study and practice. He's an author of many books and is the editor of Caravan of Souls, an introduction to the Sufi path of Hazrat Inayat Khan. Pirziya divides his time between Richmond, Virginia, and Suresnes in France. Thank you. It's such a joy and an honor to have you with us. Thank you. And the first thing we want to ask you, if you can give us an entry into your lineage, if you can tell us something about your lineage, your grandfather, your work, etc.
Yes, greetings. Well, thank you so much for the kind invitation. I'm delighted to be here with you and to see you once again. We had a nice conversation a few months ago, and I'm glad to reconnect. And let me say, first of all, that I admire so greatly the film that you made together, Zaya Maurizio, the film Where the Olive Trees Weep, which is a very powerful piece of testimony to the plight of the people of Palestine at this time. And it's very important for the world to understand what is occurring and the level of suffering, because only then we can work toward solutions that will include everyone. We can't have a solution that excludes any group of people. The solution has to be one that absolutely respects the rights of every people of this planet. And your film goes a long way in letting the world know what is the condition of people who have been displaced and are in a great hardship. And since then, of course, the situation has only worsened. And it's important for us to have conversations like the one that we're having today, conversations that have to do with acknowledging the suffering in this world and envisioning a world in which we can overcome the alienation between groups of people and overcome the systems of oppression that divide us when in our heart of hearts we know that we belong to one family. Now, you asked about my lineage, and that's a lineage that is entirely concerned with the one family that is humanity. My grandfather, Hazrat Pir Zia Inayat Khan, traveled to the Western world from India, where he was born and where he grew up, and lived as a professor of music for a number of years before receiving the blessing of his Sufi teacher. Hazrat Inayat Khan's teacher was Sayyid Abu Hashim Madani, and it was he that blessed him to go forth and to travel across the sea. And he traveled in America, and he traveled in Europe, and he married an American lady and raised a family. And he was asked by those that he encountered along the way not only to communicate the music of India, the classical spiritual music of India, but also to bring forth the mystical philosophy that underlies it. And he had been blessed and trained in this way. And so he responded by offering the methods and the teachings of this lineage. And in this way, the first order of Sufism in the Western world, west of the Balkans, north of Andalusia, was founded by him in the 1917. And so I'm continuing in his tradition. I've been asked by my father to continue this work, and so I've tried to devote myself to that message, which is a message of healing for humanity, of a reminder of the oneness that unites us, and a call to awaken to the qualities of the living heart.
Thank you. And we all often hear, we associate Sufism with the Middle East, with Persia, little less with India. Can you tell us more about the journey of Sufism and the origins? Do you trace the origins to the prophets, to the Abrahamic, to the prophets, or even prior to that? I know in India, sometimes it's traced to the saints with the blankets. I've heard stories that. How do you understand the more deeper history of the lineage?
Yes. Well, since the dawn of humankind, there have been human beings who became vessels for the guidance that's constantly pouring through the universe from the source of the universe. And these beings have been known as prophets and as saints and as sages. And every human being has the capacity to open to the guidance that is coming through. And there's some who have, whether because of destiny or because of some choice that they have made, have become channels that whose legacy continues to resound down the ages and who are remembered. There are many more who aren't remembered because many have been forgotten, and many of those who stood forward into such a role found themselves opposed and vilified and mocked and martyred. And so it hasn't been an easy path down the ages for those who spoke on behalf of the deeper truths of humanity. They had a great struggle, and we only know the names of a few of them. But these are the holy messengers and the sages. And so in all lands of the world, we can find the histories of such pathbreakers, trailblazers. And yes, now very often what happens afterward is that their legacy is taken up by institutions or fought over by followers and hardened into rigid dogmas that become sources of ideological contention. And then something is very much lost in that, because what was the essence of it all was a fresh transmission of pure spirit, something that comes from the living reality that is the source of this world and which revives and heals this world. But when that current becomes reduced to something purely formal, purely ideological, then instead of being a healing source in this world, it can actually become a source of division.
And that's what differentiates religion and mystical path, which Sufi is a mystical path. Would you say that?
Well, I believe at the heart of all religion, there is a mystical experience. And there are many ways in which religion can make that mystical experience more available to a community through certain communal forms that bring people together, that connect them with divine names, which raise their consciousness and orient them to beautiful ideals. So religion can serve that function, which is to say, to disseminate the mystical experience of the prophets and the sages who are at the root of the dispensation. However, religion does all too often succumb to the influences that become intertwined with it, political influences or all kinds of pressures that involve some kind of assertion of an identity which is over and against another identity and which is looking for self-aggrandizement rather than what is the essence of mysticism, which is actually the dissolution of this hardened oppositional self-image, and instead an experience of presence that is pervasive.
And what would you say is the quest for Sufism in the it's often known as the path of love. So the heart is described as the center of consciousness, as the divine connection. How those on a spiritual path can cultivate a heart, purify the heart so it can be receptive to divine guidance, and especially when we are faced with injustice, violence, brutality. This is a big question. I went, but how do we purify the heart when we are facing injustice? How do we still respond and open the heart instead of close the heart and protect ourselves from that?
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned the heart, because the heart is really the core of our human condition. And it exists in tandem with the head or the mind, the intellect. And the two have a rapport that is not an equivalency. There's a relationship between the two, but not an identity. My grandfather used to say that the heart is the depth of the mind, and the mind is the surface of the heart. And of course, we need to have the outward-facing executive function, you might say, that the mind fulfills, that function that enables us to process information methodically, rationally, and to in this way navigate the world. But if that mental function isn't rooted in a wakeful, living heart, then it's a kind of a trance condition. It's a kind of autopilot without the core having an influence that matters. And then you've got a mind that's essentially subject to the dynamics of an interpersonal world that is so often determined by power imbalances and all of the fears that come with those disparities, which means that the mind moves into a mode, a kind of survival mode that even is exacerbated and exaggerated to become more than a survival mode, a mode of aggrandizement and self-assertion and the attempt to control and manipulate its environment. That is the character of a mind that has become unrooted no longer grounded in the heart quality. So the whole endeavor in Sufism is to reroute the mind in a heart that can provide the larger context, the larger frame of guidance for the executive function of the mind. And that would be a context that's based on a symbiotic understanding of life, an understanding of life that isn't driven merely by competitive instincts, but instead recognizes the current of oneness that unites all beings and which looks for synergies. It looks for opportunities to be part of an organicity, to be part of a larger organism. It sees the systemic levels. It doesn't just see the dualistic opposition between this I that's seeking its own aggrandizement and a countervailing I that functions as a rival. Instead, the heart sees all of humanity as one body, and then all of the the biomass, all of the species of the earth as a still greater body, and the earth as a body that's within the body of the solar system. And so the heart makes those connections. It has an empathetic understanding that sees things holistically in a way that the mind doesn't necessarily do.
Mhm. How can we be present to the suffering of the world, witness and make a stand for justice or against the injustice we see, and at the same time trust that everything that is happening is part of a divine order?
Yeah.
How can one, yeah.
Yeah. That's a wonderful question. I think that's the question we have to keep asking ourselves and working with. It's the key question. And of course, every true question, every profound question carries in itself its own solution. If you live with that question, you're going to be guided. You're going to be shown the answer. You have to live with that conundrum. One response to the question would be to point to a story. And it's the story of three sheikhs, three Sufi teachers. And the teachers were asked a question. The question was, what do you do when you see someone do something wrong? And the first sheikh answered, if I see someone do something wrong, I correct them. I call attention to the problem and I show them that it needs to be fixed. That's the first answer. The second sheikh gave a different answer. The second sheikh said, if I see something wrong, I look past it and look to what's beautiful and draw the attention there and build on what's beautiful and don't focus on what's wrong. And then the third sheikh answered, wrong? What wrong? So three very different answers. And yet each one has its meaning, it has its truth. And in fact, in Sufism, these answers correspond to different stages on the path. And there's a fourth stage too. So the first stage, and everyone has to go through the stage, and still, even having gone through it, it remains valid even still. And that is, it's called the stage of Sharia. And that means working to establish fairness in the world. It's the level of ethics and ensuring fair play and not taking more than is your due and ensuring reciprocity in all human dealings. So that's the stage in which the pursuit of justice and insisting on justice and fighting for justice is absolutely necessary. Then there's a second stage beyond Sharia, which is called tariqah. And tariqah means that you're not simply concerned with an even score, but you're making an effort to go beyond reciprocity and to be generous, to be forgiving, to be more kind than legally you need to be. So the level of tariqah has to do with focusing on beauty and cultivating beauty and trying to embody it and trying to build it in this world. And that's another way. Then the third sheikh answers from the perspective of hakikat. And hakikat means absolute truth, all encompassing oneness. And from that perspective, there is no duality. Everything is divine. Everything is an expression of the eternal in time, and everything expresses and reveals the nature of the one life that is forever. And if one is in that state, one is beyond judgment, one is beyond saying this is right and this is wrong, one is just witnessing God in this moment, in everything. And that's a true experience. The fourth stage is to weave them together because all three are needed. We do need to, we need to fight for justice and make sure that those who are disadvantaged are given the chance to receive what is their due. We also need to be careful not to get stuck in a mode in which, in fighting for justice, we fall into a polarity where we can't see the humanity anymore of ones whose tyranny we're challenging. And all too often, a freedom fighter runs the risk of becoming a tyrant himself or herself if one isn't careful. You see how a resistance rises up to overturn a regime, and then those who come into power just replicate the same dynamics of power all over again. So yes, the cause of justice is important, but there are other aspects to be integrated. And the second aspect of tariqah, again, has to do with working toward the beautiful, being guided by beauty. Allahu Jamil wa yuhibbul Jamal is the Sufi saying. God is beautiful and loves beauty. And so in every effort that we undertake for the cause of justice or for any cause, let it be beautiful, not only outwardly beautiful, aesthetically beautiful, but beautiful in manner, beautiful in intention, beautiful in that it's working toward and is waking up to that grace, that fineness, that musicality that makes us swoon when we see it in someone or see it in a community or see it in nature, that it reminds us of why we're here in the first place. It reminds us why this universe exists. It exists to reveal this beauty. And then we've got to have this ability also to say that ultimately there's a fuller beauty. Sufis speak of two different kinds of beauty, and one is called Jamal, and the other is called Husn. And Jamal is that beauty that you could say it has an opposite. The opposite of Jamal is ugliness, and we want to, avoid ugliness in our manner, in how we speak, in what we do. We want to avoid ugliness. So it's aspirational to work toward a fineness, a thoughtfulness, a graciousness, a beauty that is evident. But that, even that kind of beauty still is part and parcel of a limited view of the world, a view in which there's always something better and something worse. Whereas there's a higher beauty, and that is the ultimate beauty, which is called husn, and that has no opposite. And that's the beauty that where you see in the longue durée, in the ultimate scheme of things, or even in the essence of this here and now, everything is included, everything is encompassed by and contained within that perfection that can never be marred, that can never be broken, that is already perfect and all pervading. So that is the beauty that rejects nothing, accepts everything, and goes to the essence.
Yeah. So um, I was seeing a video a friend sent from a child in Gaza that his parents were killed just this week, and he was between life and death. He was severely wounded, and I, yeah, my heart was shattered. I couldn't see beauty in that. I couldn't see the divine in that. I just felt like, how can this be? How can this happen? Why? Yeah, and many and I could have turned away and not watch it because it was too hard to see it. But something in me said, no, I have to see it, because if we really feel we are one, what's happening to this child is happening to all of us.
Yeah. Yes, but that's why I appreciate so much your film and your readiness to not to turn away and to invite others not to turn away, but to be with what's happening and to be with it with an open heart, as hard as that is. And it's extremely hard. What is going on now, what children are going through, what families are going through as they're just torn apart. Whole multi-generational families are destroyed. What is happening is something that those of us who have been fortunate enough to live in relatively peaceful times have a hard time fathoming. And yet all of us have some measure of pain in our life. We've gone through something. And in fact, having gone through something painful, as much as one might, at the time, one certainly didn't welcome that pain into one's life. One wished it could have been otherwise. One wished that one didn't have to suffer that ordeal. That being so, it's precisely because we have some degree of experience of pain that we can actually empathize with others who are in pain and in many cases in much worse conditions than we've ever known. But it's because we've had some struggle in our life. So there's a sense in which our own life struggle opens up our heart. It can open up the heart if we allow it to do that. And the other alternative is in the struggle, in the hardship, to close down, to numb the heart, to clench it like a fist. And then that's what leads on to the inability to witness the suffering in others, and a kind of obliviousness that enables structures of oppression to be perpetuated. So in order to get past those systems, we'll all need to be able to tap into our own experience of suffering and let it open us up to the even much greater degree of suffering that is around us in this world, and to take it to heart.
Yeah. Yeah.
One.
Thank you. This is, yeah.
Yeah.
That's the path. We have to, yeah. There is something, and what we call, and I don't know if you have a practice or a pointer to brokenheartedness, that when, and the heart doesn't break, but there is the experience of being shattered from the suffering. But I wonder, in the Sufi tradition, do you have a understanding of that?
Yeah, well, there is we have practices that take us into the world by turning within. And so when we're aware of someone or a group of people who are in hardship and in need, there's a practice of turning toward them. And there are degrees of this. And all of us, to some extent, do this all of the time. When we say to a friend, let's say you heard from a friend that they're not feeling well, and you say, I'll keep you in my heart. Just saying that, communicating that intention already has a healing effect on that person. They're glad to feel the connection with you and to feel that you're keeping them in your heart. But when we say this, it's good, first of all, to say it and at some level to feel it. But how consciously do we feel it? It can actually be a practice. We can actually take time and go into the heart and find the person there, meet the person inside your qalb, your spiritual heart. And sometimes we do this to celebrate the happiness of other people, just to feel our connection with other people and wish them well. And sometimes, if something really terrible is going on, we do it in the way of an ardent prayer, calling on protection and praying for the well-being of these souls who we know are going through such an unthinkable tragedy. And we want to lift up our experience of their suffering into the divine compassion, because we know that we can't hold that suffering just in our individual self. It's too much. There's no way. But we also know that the heart is a remarkable thing in that it opens out to vastness. And there's a Sufi saying, which is that the divine voice speaks and says, I am contained in no thing, but I am contained in the heart of the sincere servant who loves me. So the heart can open up, the heart can become vast, and it can become the channel in which we take our experience, our awareness of the great suffering of someone or of a group of people, and we lift it up to the divine compassion. We say that we know that our little self can't hold this, but we know that there's a mercy, there's a grace, there's a love that is so enormous that only in that love can this terrible suffering find its way back home.
Yes, yes. For many of us in the Western world, we are so conditioned by the individual, by the belief of the individual, that we feel we have to hold, the pain of the world alone.
Yeah.
That's what I'm hearing you saying. Not an individual cannot hold that, or.
Yeah, that's right. And my grandfather once said, he said the things that the world is aware of, the angels hardly notice them. But the things that go unnoticed in the world, the angels notice that. And so just think of someone who is in their darkest hour. I think of my aunt Noor in the prison in Forsheim, chained to a wall for almost a year. I think of a child underneath rubble whose family home has just been bombed. Think of those who the world has forgotten. The structures of power have forgotten that being who in that moment seems all alone. There are spiritual beings who are there. The angels are there, and the divine presence is there. And this consolation shouldn't motivate us to inaction. It shouldn't be a reason to say all is taken care of. We can let the worst happen in this world and it doesn't matter. It does matter. We have a serious responsibility as embodied, incarnate human beings that have the right to vote, that have the ability to transfer funds to relief organizations, that have the ability to call up your representative, that have the ability to make a difference in this world in many ways. This isn't a reason not to do so. However, it can assuage the sense of hopelessness that sometimes comes over us when we see the corpses. But there's more to that soul than the corpse. There's a being that isn't destroyed when the body is destroyed. That soul lives on. And there are other beings who are actually there to help that being to heal and to journey onward into the innermost realms. And so we can be present in all of these different ways, outwardly through our human actions to challenge all kinds of unfairness and belligerence and to call for and work for a peaceful and just world. And at the same time, we can be conscious of the inner planes and direct our prayers and our participation to those worlds and to make common cause with the great guiding spirits who are working in the inner worlds. And that work is just as important as the outer work.
You briefly mentioned your aunt, Noor Inayat Khan. You want to say more about who was she for people?
Not many of us know her story, and what she stood up for in her life.
Well, I just came back recently from Germany, and I was in Dachau, the concentration camp in Dachau, where my aunt Noor in 1944 was executed, along with 3 other SOE agents. These were agents who were working for the French resistance against the Nazi occupation. And it was the 80th anniversary of their martyrdom, the martyrdom of these 3 amazingly brave ladies that knew exactly what they were doing. They knew what Nazism was. They knew it had to be stopped. And they volunteered for the most arduous and dangerous missions in the war. And they gave their whole heart to it and worked with tremendous energy and care. They did things like blowing up bridges. They did work in transmitting messages so that supplies could be airdropped to the resistance. They were doing all that they could to liberate France and to keep at bay this machine, which was the Nazi military ideology, that was founded on a vision of supremacy and domination. And Noor, who in the last years of her life served in this function as an agent of the resistance. Earlier in her life, she didn't live a long life, by the way. She was only 30 when she became a martyr. But just before the war, she had studied child psychology, and she was a writer of stories, children's stories, fairy tales. And she retold the Jataka tales, which are stories of the Buddha in the form of various heroic animals. And in a number of these stories, the animal who is the Buddha gives his life in order to save those who are in danger or those who are starving. So she spent her life studying chivalry, studying heroism, studying ethics, and taking an interest in how these values could be inspired in children. Because children come into this world fresh from heaven. And as soon as they get to this world, they are impressed with all of these influences and impressions that encourage competitiveness and a kind of path through life that's based upon an egoic identity rather than any real appreciation of the heart's life. And so she wanted to help children to keep their heart alive and to keep it growing in empathy and in courage and in all of the moral values. So her stories were written with this view in mind. And ultimately, she became her own story. Her life became the story of the heroism that she had described through so many fables hitherto.
How do you think her Sufi background informed or prepared her to make that stand, that fierce stand for freedom, and that cost her her life?
Well, thank you for that question. And, you know, she, when I think about Noor, it's a very touching subject for me. It's, as soon as I mention her, of course, I feel her in the room. So it's not, I can't speak of her as someone in the distant past. I feel her spirit. She's here right now. She's in this conversation. And how did her calling reflect her Sufi training? Well, I would say that our lineage of Sufism, and I think that this is true of many lineages of Sufism, is one that wants to look past the contention that exists between religions and between various communities of people, and wants to find a way to unite the world in kinship. And so she used to give classes for Sufi children. And in one class, she would speak about the Buddha, and in another class, she would speak about Moses and so forth. She was studying all of the scriptures of the world, and she was interested in the golden thread that moves through all of them, that one current of oneness. And so when she saw that here is this ideology that's founded upon the exaltation of one race above others, the villainization of one religion, Judaism, the extreme anti-Semitism of Nazism, and just an entire worldview founded upon separation and supremacy that was so contrary to everything that she had been raised to believe about oneness, about kindredness, about kindness, about the way in which, if there's any greatness in the world, it's not to be found in overpowering others. It's to be found in generously giving of your spirit in the service of the all. Her father said, the service of God means that we each work for all. And so she wasn't fighting simply on behalf of France or Great Britain. Actually, she was, as an SOE agent, she was deployed by Great Britain. But when she was recruited, they said, will you be loyal to the British government? And she answered, in this conflict, I'm going to, serve the Allied cause against Nazism, but I reserve the right after the war to stand for India's independence. So she wasn't a nationalist. She wasn't fighting for one nation against another nation. She was fighting for the freedom of all people.
And her final words as she was killed was freedom, liberté.
Liberté, that's right.
That's
yeah. Yeah. And just think of the courage. She was, first of all, she had been chained to a wall in a prison cell in Forsheim and tortured. She was treated terribly. And then she was tricked. She and the other SOE agents were told, you're being taken now for agricultural work. But they took her to Dachau. And then all that night, she was brutalized. She was absolutely beaten to a pulp. And she lived through that. She had lived through nearly a year in isolation in the worst circumstances. Now she was beaten to within an inch of her life, and then she was taken to kneel to be shot. And in that moment, imagine being in the hands of Nazi torturers who are psychotic. They chose those prison guards actually because they were psychopathic. To being in the control of a torturer of that kind, and to be so severely tortured, and then in that very last moment, you have no power in the situation whatsoever. You're surrounded by barbed wire and guards, but the valor, the courage, the indomitable spirit to use your last breath and say, liberté. That's why she's the hero of so many of us. And she and the other agents who were executed on that day, and in fact, many people of goodwill. There were people in Germany who took in Jews and others who were going to be detained because they knew it wasn't right. And so they hid them away, and they made themselves guilty. They ran great risk. They could have been imprisoned or executed themselves for taking that risk, but they just saw that here, look, we have this one life to live. And this is the chance. Are we going to turn a blind eye to this kind of evil, or are we going to take a stand, even at whatever cost?
Yeah.
And the parallel is so
Yes.
appalling to what's happening now. The parallel is so every word you said. I mean, it's so appalling.
Yeah.
And how can we as humanity break those cycles? Because the people who were so Jewish people who were hurt and prosecuted and for so long, and they are now the one that are inflicting that on other people. That is the cycle of suffering that
it's the great tragedy. The cycle is a cycle. And yet we human beings have the freedom to break out of the cycle. We can make that choice. We have to have the moral courage. And it means stepping out of the condition of the heart in which the heart is merely reacting to its circumstances. That great moral courage requires going beyond reacting. It requires proactivity. It requires not just being a victim of history, but fashioning history in accordance with the widest conceivable vision of oneness, of empathy, of kindredness that one can conceive of. Only that will break the cycle. So the immediate thing, of course, is to cease fire, stop the violence, stop the carnage, stop the destruction. That's the first thing. Start there. Start with a suspension of all violence. Then there has to be a process, step by step, of listening, understanding, really coming to terms with the whole history and seeing that we don't need to be locked into that history. There's another way. We can learn from each other's experience. We can learn from each other's pain. We can build a different world. And that's possible. It could start right now.
Yeah. And that's the vision we can hold, those of us who are not at the heart of the war, of the genocide. So that's collectively, that's what we can hold. And the path might not be clear. It looks very dark and very grim, but like you said, only collectively we can break those cycles.
Yeah, and you've showcased some of the modern day heroes in your film, those who have experienced torture and great suffering, and who aren't calling for a backlash in kind. They're not calling for the destruction of enemies. They're calling for a completely revolutionary idea of the human experience, one that is founded upon our relatedness and our mutuality, and the fact that our own heart cannot be, in any case, ever secluded from the condition of the hearts and bodies of anyone across this world, how we're all woven together into one tapestry. And that call is the call of our time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Of all times.
Times.
Of all.
I'd say now more than ever. It's all times, definitely all times. But it's almost like the world is shrinking because of patterns of immigration, the technology of communication. There's so many ways in which also population is expanding. Wild areas are diminishing. We're coming very close together in certain ways, while spiritually we're farther apart than ever before. And so we've got to catch up. The internet is connecting us on one level, and there's another level in which we're still so disconnected.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And this is just the last question before we open to hear questions from our audience. Maybe it's a big question, but I wonder, so in Sufism, you have the stages or the practices, the fana, the annihilation of the ego, and the baka, the surrender to the divine. In religion, often the first step, the dissolution of the ego, is not practiced. I mean, this is maybe I'm trying to rationalize and explain why we are here today. Is like, how is it possible? Because that's what we are seeing in the war, the identity, the ego, the identity with one religion or one ethnicity is what is at the root of this perpetual suffering. So when we skip that step of the disillusionment, practicing the disillusioning of the ego and identity, perhaps is it simplistic way to explain it?
Yeah. No, I think that's very well said. And the ways in which the collective identities
Yes.
mirror the symptoms that we find in ourself when it comes to an egoic nature that's disconnected from the deeper soul and heart levels, and an egoic nature which is polarized, which is competitive, which is very much concerned with its self-image, which wants to be liked and not disliked, and wants to, be popular and wants to have all of the good things and so forth. That egoic attitude, which is part of the life of all of us, is writ large at the level of international relations, and those national polities become surrogates of these tendencies within ourselves to want to advance our interest over other interests. So each nation is jockeying to have the elevated position, and that's going to continue so long as, let's say, from the ground up, those egoic tendencies are operating in all of us. And so the 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 countervailing healing factor is the ability to blur this boundary. We look in the mirror, we see that it looks like the body just ends right here, and that's the end of the story. But if you close your eyes, you don't feel that you just end suddenly somewhere in space. If you close your eyes and watch your breath, you feel breath is coming in, breath is going out, light's coming in, light's radiating from inside. You feel this connection that the ego isn't so familiar with. But as soon as you start to practice like that, these heart qualities open up, and that can change the whole culture.
Yeah. Yes. We're porous. We're into
Porous is a good word.
Yeah. And and if nothing else, we are made of 90% of water.
Yeah.
So how can you not identify with the ocean and the river and the rain? I mean, it's incredible. We are made of matter that is not us.
Another species.
We have bacteria and viruses. We are 97% of other creature of different size that live inside in coordination. How can we define that this is the border of our existence? We are everything else around us. Without the air we breathe, we are dead in 2 minutes. So if this is your border, make a big wall. In 2 minutes, you're dead. I mean, that's So,
yeah, you mentioned the microorganisms. I think that's a very interesting and relevant consideration as well, because even if we consider ourselves as one person, that person is made up of an ecology of life forms working within us, mitochondria and the various organisms in the microbiome that collaborate. So the idea, the kind of nationalistic idea or supremacist idea that everyone has to, follow a certain identical regimen of thought and of appearance, and to conform to some kind of collective identity is completely contrary to the logic of nature that our body depends upon. And so what can peace look like? What can justice look like? It's going to look something like what's going on in the human gut. It's going to be these different organisms working together to make the whole body flourish.
Exactly. And accept a new nutrient, transform them, find a solution.
And that's what healing is, right? When we heal, when we're out of balance, there is illness. And when we heal, we find that peace within. Yeah. We can take some questions now, and there are already a few questions. So maybe we can start with, I'm curious if Mimi is here. Otherwise, we can read your question. Raise
And
your
also
hand.
raise your hand
Yeah.
and write the question in the Q&A so we are aware of what you're asking so we can. And Daria, I love your question. Oh, yay. Whoa, look at the explosion of questions. Okay.
So Mimi, if you would like to come on screen, otherwise we can read the question. You want to start?
Let's start here. I have another one ready, but
okay, no,
it's too late. What can we do with our grief when we cannot control what is happening? I've been trying to help people I can help where I live, but the suffering of Palestinians makes me feel I need to do something for them, but I don't know what to do aside from donating to non-profit organization. I have a hard time talking about the issue with people who have just no idea what is happening and who are not interested in learning. So talking about is very hard. I do view humanity in a very spiritual manner with love in my heart, but I sometimes feel so much love that I am overwhelmed, however. And also an important thing she says, that she has experienced, I myself have experienced war. So it's very personal to me. Sure, she's been exposed before.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that question. I think again, I would just come back to the thought that the question is more important than any answer that I can give. The fact that you're asking this question lives in you, that question is going to attract in you the guidance that will lead you to the further unfoldment of your purpose in life. So no one really can come along and tell you what your purpose is. And each of us has an offering, a gift, something to bring forward in our life that others can help us find by mirroring it back to us. But it's going to come from you. And I don't think the answer is going to be the same for each person. I think that there's going to be one person who will, the two of you, Zaya and Maurizio, are extraordinary filmmakers. So you took your gift. You have a great gift in the area of filmmaking, and you offered it up because you felt the call and the need. So others will have another gift, and that's what they'll offer. So it's going to be unique to each person. There can't be one instruction that says, everyone go out and do such and such a thing. But you have your relationships, you have your sphere of influence, you have your words in this world and your prayers in the inner world, the things that we can do with our pocketbooks, as you say, with our votes. There are other things that we have to do with our consciousness by directing our attention in certain ways and by holding up in our minds and in our hearts a vision of what could be, and then orienting our whole life, the way that we speak, the way that we act, the way that we relate to other people, to express that vision of what may be, what we want to see in the world. We've got to embody it in every choice that we make. And so even speaking about something as, such a terrible tragedy as what's going on, an important question is, how do we speak about it in a way that doesn't just tiptoe around the intense severity of the problem, and yet also in a way that isn't going to be, that isn't polarizing to the extent that, I mean, you can, first of all, just by speaking about a tragedy, that's going to necessarily arouse all kinds of responses in all kinds of minds. So that's there. But there's a way in which we can do all that we can to avoid. Well, let me put it this way. In Sufism, we have a path called futua, which means chivalry. And one of the great exponents of this Sufi chivalry is Sheikh Abu Bakr al-Warraq. And he said the chevalier, the fatah, is the one that has no enemy. The chevalier is the one that has no enemy. So one way to understand this, and I don't think this would be the right way, would be to say that the chevalier is very lucky because no one, no one has mistreated him or her, and that person goes through life just serenely, floating above the fray. But that's not what he means. Mm-hmm. He doesn't mean to say that the chevalier stands outside of the conflicts of humanity. What's really meant here, I believe, the chevalier has no enemy. That means that even if you're in a situation of conflict, even if you have to bring up a very difficult subject and you have to shine a light on something that most people would rather turn away from, even then you do so without enmity, without the idea that someone is intrinsically evil or your foe or to be destroyed. Can you think instead of all beings as souls, and souls that in many cases have gotten caught up in systems or have gotten caught up in ways of thought that lead to these kinds of conflicts and systems of oppression in this world that we've got to alleviate? But that doesn't mean through antagonism toward a conceived enemy. It means the liberation of all of us through the discovery of the divine light that lives within us all and unites us.
There are a few questions. Again, please write the question in the Q&A, not in the chat, because otherwise we are too many places to look and we get crazy. So, Shabazz, Alex Kiss. I asked to unmute. There we go.
Hello. Yeah. Hello, Pirziya. So great to see you again, Zaya Maurizio. My heart is broken open. And I have a question. So what role is there for creativity in answering the call of this time? How does a creative soul bear the weight of that call?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. And it does bring me back again to Noor, Pir Zia Noor, my aunt, who used stories in her struggle against tyranny. She saw that the Nazis were actually using fairy tales to indoctrinate German children. And she saw that the original collectors of those tales, the Grimm brothers, didn't have that view in mind at all. Actually, they were of a view that the ancient stories and legends and poetry of a nation are part of a larger tapestry that is interwoven with the poems and the songs of other nations. And in fact, stories migrate from culture to culture. And that's what Noor believed. So when she saw the Nazis using stories as a weapon of indoctrination, her creative instinct rose up to utilize stories to inculcate values of chivalry, values of generosity, and also the reality that stories move between cultures and link cultures together. And so she wrote stories based on the legends of many lands and ones that show the interconnections between cultures. So that's an example for me of how creativity can serve a purpose. And in her life, she moved back and forth between art and work on the field in espionage. So there came a time when it wasn't enough to write. She had to go out and put her life on the line. But even as she did so, you can imagine going through her mind were these stories, and it must have given her solace. It must have given her inspiration. She had around her the great elephant. She had the monkey king. She had these spirits present to her, and that's something in the midst of the bleakness of war and in the bleakness of a world that all too often is reduced to a routinization that deprives life of that juice, that rust, that sweetness that is there in creativity. It's a revolutionary act to revive the creative spirit, to revive the old legends, and to live in that enchantment.
Thank you. Thank you. So Rita has a beautiful question that we want to read. What can I do with my growing anger about the genocide going on and on and on and on? When a fire breaks out, we rush to extinguish it. This genocide seems endless and nobody in a position to stop it is acting.
And then she's saying, genocide is my enemy, is how it makes me feel.
Yeah.
And where is the divine light of the IDF forces?
Yeah.
That's all her comments.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, anger has its purpose, has its place. And if we didn't feel that anger, it would be all too easy just to slip into a kind of a trance of heedlessness and disconcern, and just to turn a blind eye to things. So anger is that kind of rising up of the conscience to say, no, something is amiss here. This shall not be, and it's a stimulus, a stimulus. So we can value it in that way. And then the question is, how do you channel that anger? How do you move it? All emotion, it needs to be moved. Emotion has the word motion in it, and so you take that anger, but you don't keep it confined in a small space, and you have to let it breathe, and you have to let that flame give out its light, and the light is the light that illuminates a situation, allows you to see clearly what's happening there, and the rights of all concerned. I mean, all too often, there's just a sheer negligence when it comes to rights. Everyone in this world has intrinsically the same rights as each one of us, and there's just no gainsaying it. And so, anything that any of us can do to highlight the rights of all people and the way in which those rights have been infringed, that's the light of that anger fire. It's revealing the truth that all of us are born with a hak, a right is bestowed upon us by God, and if that should be treated lightly, if it should be trampled, that is a great desecration, and humanity needs to come together and to address that atrocity. So the anger is necessary, but then the next step is to channel it, and I trust you are doing so, taking that concern and letting it move you in the way of action. And each of us can only do what is within our power, and each of us is one person. But the more that individuals rise up within their own capacity and inspire each other, not by becoming bitterly polemical, but by envisioning a world in which all rights are respected, and in which we are able to quickly shift out of these completely untenable systems of oppression that right now are taking a toll on one group of people, and in fact in various parts of the world taking a toll on various groups of people. But ultimately they're going to take a toll on all of us, because we're all going to go down together unless these systems are transformed and and transform soon.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Often we can, in spiritual circles, the anger can become the enemy. And thank you for acknowledging the power, the flame within anger that has a transformation power, transformative. Yeah. Okay, maybe one more question and Richard. Berfo, can we hear from you?
Hello. Thanks a lot, Pirziya. Really, it was such a wonderful conversation. And also I can relate a lot with this practices of Sufism. I'm actually coming from more Alevi tradition that is whirling dervishes. That was a kind of practice that I was actually practicing as well. But at this time of this never-ending atrocities, this genocide, this massacres, this wars. How can we really open up such spiritual realm to mobilize people around this kind of beauty that you actually described? And also, I have a question that you said maybe the possibilities of the Sharia, Tariqa, and Hakikat that should be actually all-encompassing in the way that we embody life in this moment. Isn't this contradictory at some levels? That was my question. Is it possible to unite religion and secular in this manner of liberation? I'm a little bit disappointed in life in that moment, maybe that I cannot see the possibility of this mobilization through it.
Yeah. Thank you for your question, and certainly I have great respect for the. You said that you come from the Bektashi tradition, the Alevi Bektashi, yes, to the lineage of Haji Bektash Veli. So that's a very beautiful and sacred lineage. And now you asked, one question was about how do you connect with the sacred vision of oneness in times of war and times of genocide. Now, in our Sufi community, we have a practice called tawajjuh, which means turning your inner face toward the faces of those that you wish to meet in your heart. And it might begin with those who are nearest and dearest to you, those that you're praying for within your own family or among your friends. But the heart can become wider and wider, and you include more and more in your heart, and you take some time each day and turn within. You connect with those that share your life in some fashion, with whom you are connected. And actually, the word tawajjuh, it's interesting because it comes from the root wajh in Arabic, which means face. And in a way, that social media platform called Facebook is like an outer replica, in a way, of the principle of what is happening here. Like the way that you would sign on to social media, you would see the faces or posts of your friends, you would communicate a message. In a way, that is a technological echo of something that happens in the inner life of all of us. And in Sufism, it's a practice, which is that you turn within. Instead of turning on social media, you turn within and you connect with those beings that are part of your life, but you can actually stretch your heart and realize that it's not only the ones that you know that are connected with you, and beings across the world who are undergoing atrocities are also connected with you, and you can turn your face toward them and meet them in that space. And when circumstances aren't so dire, we use a word which is the word fazl. And that word just means good wishes. It's a prayer of benediction, a well wish. You turn within and you send well wishes toward all that you find, all those beings that you find when you turn within, and in that way turn out into the world. But in a time of catastrophe, we use another word, and that word is Aman. Aman. And the word Aman means sanctuary. And when not only one person is doing so, but hundreds or thousands, that means that every day there are souls that are tuning into the same field, you could say, the field of that word, Aman, meaning sanctuary. They're tuning into that field and lifting up prayers into it and offering up the deepest wish that those who are in extremity, those who are in the grip of the most terrible times, will be met in the divine compassion that is already right there with them. And so essentially what we're doing here, it isn't that our prayers are something that can change the world, but it does mean that our prayers open us up to the divine intention of compassion that this world was made to serve as a channel for. And we're endeavoring to clear ourselves to be more fully a channel by offering that prayer. And so that is if you ask for a particular technique, this is something that for the last year in our community, we have done this every day, to say this word Aman 101 times while we're tuning in and meeting those who are in that dire need.
That's really interesting. Aman also means cure in Turkish. It's sanctuary, but it's also a cure. I think the origin comes from Arabic.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Thanks a lot. Yeah.
Thank you. Richard, you have a brief
this
question?
Probably will be our last comment or question.
Richard, you want to ask something? Yeah, there we go. Oops.
Zia, my beloved, your father called this the path of the brokenhearted, and your grandfather said God breaks our hearts open again and again until they stay open. Pir Zia taught us the zikr of the brokenhearted, which you may recall, with the circular head motion of Nicholas of Aflua. Would you lead us in that practice of recalling on the in-breath the kindness and on the out-breath the cruelty?
Mm-hmm. It's good to see you, Richard.
Good to see you.
Yeah. Well, Richard is referring to a form of zikr in which there's a movement of the head. And Zaya, you mentioned fana and baqa. Fana being the dissolution of a calcified form of the ego, and baqa being the discovery of what remains when that encrusted formation dissolves away. And in the practice of the zikr, these two components are there. So there are two halves to the movement. The first half is to move the head in an arc. And as you move the head in an arc, this gesture encourages a kind of dissolution of the calcified detritus, all of the impressions that have built up over time as a kind of carapace over us, all of the hardened influences and ideas and fears and the ingrained constraints that keep the mind bound up within an enclosed circumference. And so the first movement is one of relaxing and releasing that encumbrance, and it's an unraveling of what's knotted up inside, and it's a relaxation of the heart, unclenching of the heart, so it can begin to open up and feel again. And then when you say illa Allah, you see, when you make the arc, you say la ilaha. There is no God, is the meaning. No God. You're dissolving your preconceptions. You're dissolving your assumptions and all of the baggage that you carry, and enter into the mystery. And you're opening your heart up also to, why did it take on that narrow carapace? Why did it shrink back into itself? Well, for fear of feeling. And now you're going to dare to feel again. And of course, the only reason to accept that risk is because you know that this time you're going to lift your feeling up into the divine compassion, and the divine presence will witness and encompass all that your heart experiences in its joy, in its pain, and that emboldens you to open up your heart without fear that the heart will succumb to the extremity of what a heart is capable of feeling in the throes of this world of chaos and loss. So we say La ilaha in this direction, and then come right down into the heart and say Illallah.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Pirziya.
Thank you so much, Pirziya, for
Hi.
this deep, rich conversation and gifts you've given us that I feel they're gonna continue live in my heart and grow. And
it's just this conversation is another notch in I feel this tingling desire to convert to Islam so profoundly since the movie. I feel that every little thing is coming towards me, so I'm more and more I'm so satisfied.
Every day is a conversion. Every day is a turning toward the one, toward that beauty, toward that compassion, toward that endlessness that we all have come from and are returning to and are sustained by every day. And Zaya and Maurizio, I'd like to thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity, for bringing these friends together here. And I just really commend your work and wish you well always.
thank you for your generosity.
Thank you.
and
Thank you.
the beauty. You reminded us that we're held by a greater mystery, and we're not alone in that.
Amen. Amen.
Thank you, Pirziya. And sorry, one question. A few people ask how they can find the books of Noor.
We put it in the chat.
Did we put that? Okay.
No, but
okay.
put it again. Let's put it again. Yeah.
And anything else you would like for those of us who would like to continue following your work or deepen your teachings?
I would just bring your attention back to your dharma, your task. You've got something in this world to embody, and no one else can embody it for you. That's your your task, and you're going to live it. And so it's just a question of coming back to your breath, coming back to every footstep. And when you've been inspired, let that inspiration waken something in yourself. It's the inspiration is arousing something. What's going on inside yourself? That's where you need to turn next. What's growing? Let it grow. Let it come out. Let it reveal itself.
Thank you. Thank you. So much gratitude. Thank you, everyone, for being here, for bringing your beautiful hearts and these journeys every day, every moment.
Yeah.
And we're in this together. We will continue our conversations. We'll meet here again.
And
in a
again,
couple of
and
weeks.
again, and again.
And again.
Please come back. Stay with us. Together we can hopefully make a change.
Blessings.
Inshallah. Amin. Amin.
Inshallah.
Oh.